Did you ever wonder if medieval women were just quiet figures in the background locked away in castles with no say in their own lives? What if the stories you heard about their limited roles are only part of the truth, or even mostly wrong? Are you ready to discover the surprising ways medieval women defied expectations and reshaped their own destinies from the year 500 to 1500? Number 5. The glass ceiling was shattered. How women wielded power, beyond the castle walls and rose through the ranks. For a long time, popular stories have painted a picture of medieval women as universally powerless, confined to the home or hidden behind heavy castle doors. This legend suggests that a woman's place was strictly domestic, and that any ambition she might have had was squashed by a society run entirely by men. The truth, however, is far more complex and much more vibrant. Medieval women found numerous ways to step out of the shadows, wield significant influence, and even climb the social ladder, proving that their lives were anything but static or solely domestic. Their social mobility was not a fantasy, but a lived reality for many, even if it was often a challenging path. Let us look at the bustling towns and cities of the High Middle Ages, places like London, Paris, Florence, or Bruges. These were centers of commerce, craftsmanship, and innovation, and women were deeply embedded in their economic life. They were not merely consumers, but active producers and merchants. Women ran taverns, brewed ale, baked bread, and sold goods in the marketplace. Take the example of the alewives, who were crucial to the daily lives of most medieval communities. Brewing was a common female occupation, often carried out from home, and it allowed women to earn independent incomes and manage their own small businesses. A woman named Matilda, for instance, might be the chief brewer in her village, known for her strong ale, her business acumen allowing her to support her family and even hire assistants. Her success could translate into greater respect within the community and a more comfortable lifestyle for her family, a clear form of economic and social advancement. Beyond basic provisions, women were active in various crafts. In textile production, for example, women were indispensable. From spinning and weaving wool to producing fine silks and linens, their labor was central to the economy. Women were often involved in every stage of cloth production, from raw materials to finished garments. Some female artisans even managed their own workshops, training apprentices, including other women. Historians have uncovered records of women running businesses in professions as diverse as hat making, embroidery, parchment making, and even goldsmithing. In some guilds, though predominantly male, women held a recognized status, sometimes as sisters of the guild, contributing to the guild's activities and benefiting from its protection. A woman might start as an apprentice in a silk workshop, mastering her craft over years, eventually becoming a master herself, opening her own shop, and hiring other women to work for her. This was not just about making a living, it was about achieving a recognized status within a skilled trade, a form of professional mobility that could lead to significant wealth and influence. The highest echelons of power were also not entirely closed off. While kings ruled kingdoms, queens often held immense, though sometimes indirect, power. They acted as regents when their husbands were away on crusade or campaigns, or when their sons were too young to rule. A regent queen effectively governed the realm, issued decrees, managed finances, and even commanded armies. Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful women of the Middle Ages, ruled vast territories in her own right, participated in a crusade, and exerted significant political influence over both French and English courts. Her life is a testament to the fact that women, especially those of high birth, were not merely decorative figures, but active political players. When Eleanor rode to war or held court, she was not just her husband's consort, she was a power in her own right, wielding authority that shaped the destinies of kingdoms. Her very existence challenged the notion of women being confined. Beyond queens, abbesses, the heads of wealthy and powerful convents were also significant figures. These women managed vast estates, commanded large numbers of people, including monks and nuns, dispensed justice, and were often highly educated and influential spiritual and intellectual leaders. An abbess like Hildegard of Bingen, for example, was not only a spiritual leader but also a composer, philosopher, physician, and political advisor to emperors and popes. She corresponded with the most powerful men of her age, offering counsel and criticism, demonstrating an intellectual and moral authority that few men could match. Her convent was a center of learning and economic activity, and she, as its head, was a true leader, responsible for its prosperity and the well-being of its inhabitants. The position of abbess offered a path to leadership and substantial social mobility for women who chose a religious life, often granting them more autonomy and authority than they might have found in a secular marriage. Even within noble households, women played critical roles in estate management. While the lord might be away fighting or at court, his lady was often left in charge of running the vast estate, managing resources, overseeing the workforce, and defending the castle if necessary. This required administrative skill, knowledge of law, and the ability to command respect. Many noble women successfully managed their properties, demonstrating sharp business acumen and political astuteness. Records show women negotiating leases, collecting rents, supervising agricultural operations, and engaging in legal disputes to protect their family's interests. A lady of a manor, often referred to as a domina, was a formidable figure, responsible for the economic stability and often the military defense of her demesne. Her competence directly impacted the prosperity and security of her family, reinforcing her status and influence. The very structure of medieval society, though hierarchical, allowed for some fluidity. While most people remained in the social class they were born into, the possibility of upward mobility, however rare, existed. For women, this often came through strategic marriages, exceptional talent, or opportunities created by specific circumstances like widowhood, which we will explore further. But the idea that all women were simply passive recipients of their fate is a simplification that ignores the vast evidence of their active participation in economic, political, and cultural life. Consider the role of women in the burgeoning urban centers. The growth of towns provided more opportunities for women to engage in independent economic activity compared to the more rigidly structured rural manorial system. In towns, women could operate as independent traders, selling goods they produced or purchased. They ran inns and brothels, managed shops, and often worked alongside their husbands in family businesses, inheriting the business upon their husband's death and running it themselves. These women were not just helping out, they were often the backbone of the enterprise, handling finances, managing staff, and engaging with customers. The legal concept of feme sole, meaning a woman acting independently, often applied in urban environments, allowing married women to conduct business in their own name, incur debts, and enter into contracts without their husband's permission. This provided a crucial legal framework for their economic independence and mobility within the merchant class. Furthermore, women in medieval society were often relied upon to manage the household economy, whether it was a peasant cottage or a vast noble estate. This was not a minor role. It involved budgeting, managing food supplies, overseeing servants, and producing many essential goods for the family. The smooth functioning of any household, from the humblest to the grandest, depended heavily on the managerial skills of its women. A competent household manager, regardless of her social standing, gained respect and authority within her immediate sphere. For a peasant woman, efficiently managing her household's resources meant the difference between survival and hardship. For a noblewoman, it meant maintaining the dignity and prosperity of her lineage. These skills, though often overlooked in traditional narratives of power, were essential for social stability and often translated into tangible influence within their communities. Even in warfare, traditionally seen as an exclusively male domain, women could exert influence. While they rarely fought on the front lines, noblewomen often organized defenses, rallied troops, and negotiated terms of surrender when their castles were under siege. They were expected to be as brave and resourceful as their male counterparts in protecting their lands and families. When a lord was away, his lady was the military commander, responsible for the safety of all those within her walls. This practical, often dangerous responsibility certainly shattered any notion of universal female confinement or powerlessness. In summary, the legend of the universally powerless medieval woman, confined to the hearth, simply does not hold up to historical scrutiny. From the market stalls of bustling towns to the abbess's chair in powerful convents, from the queen's throne to the noblewoman's command of her estate, women in the Middle Ages found numerous avenues to exert power, earn wealth, and achieve significant social mobility. They were not just wives, mothers, or daughters, they were brewers, merchants, artisans, scholars, regents, and managers, actively shaping the economic, political, and social landscape of their time. Their lives were dynamic, challenging, and often surprisingly empowering. Number 4. Beyond the wedding ring. How women found freedom and influence, even through marital bonds and sometimes without them. The enduring legend often tells us that marriage was the only path for medieval women, a restrictive institution that stripped them of any personal agency or prospects for social advancement. It paints a picture of women as mere pawns in family alliances, married off without their consent, and subsequently relegated to a life of domestic servitude. This narrative implies a complete lack of personal freedom and little to no opportunity for social mobility outside of what their husbands provided. However, a deeper look into the intricacies of medieval marital practices reveals a much more nuanced reality, where women, through and around marriage, often found significant avenues for influence, wealth, and even unexpected freedom. Let us begin with the concept of the dowry and dower. While often seen as a price paid for a bride, the dowry was in fact a crucial element in a woman's economic security and leverage within her marriage. A dowry was property, money, or goods that a bride brought to her husband's family upon marriage. It was legally recognized as the wife's property, even if her husband managed it, and in many regions, it was meant to be returned to her or her family if the marriage ended in annulment, or if she was widowed. This gave women a substantial economic stake in their unions. For example, a young noblewoman, Eleanor, might bring a large sum of money and several pieces of prime farmland as her dowry. This dowry not only made her an attractive match, but also provided her with economic leverage within her husband's household. She was not coming empty-handed, she was bringing tangible assets that contributed to the family's wealth and status. Her husband could not simply squander it, it was understood to be her property, meant to support her and any children. The dower, on the other hand, was the portion of her husband's property, typically 1/3, that was set aside for the wife's support should she become a widow. This was her legal right and ensured her financial independence and social standing after her husband's death. Unlike a dowry, which was transferred at marriage, a dower was secured at the time of marriage but only came into her full possession upon widowhood. Imagine a medieval widow, Lady Anne, who suddenly finds herself alone after her husband passes away. Due to her dower rights, she is legally entitled to 1/3 of his lands, income, and property. This meant she often had her own household, her own tenants, and her own income, allowing her to live independently and maintain her social position. This was a profound form of social mobility, or at least the maintenance of status, often granting a woman more autonomy than she had ever experienced as a wife. Widows often managed vast estates, entered into lucrative trade deals, and even engaged in legal battles to protect their rights and those of their children. The legal status of a widow was often stronger than that of a married woman, providing a significant window of opportunity for independent action. The strategic marriages were certainly a reality, especially among the nobility, where alliances were forged through marriage to consolidate power, expand territories, and secure peace. While a young noblewoman might not always have chosen her husband, she was rarely a completely passive participant. Her family's honor and their future depended on her successful integration into her new family. Her role in producing heirs, managing the household, and often representing her husband's interests when he was away was crucial. A clever and capable wife could use her position to influence her husband, gain favor with powerful figures, and advance her family's social standing. For instance, a politically astute queen or noblewoman could influence court policy, arrange advantageous marriages for her children, and serve as a crucial intermediary between different factions. Her social mobility was tied to her marriage, but it was not merely a consequence, it was an active contribution. Furthermore, not all women married or married young. Some chose a religious life, entering convents where they could pursue intellectual endeavors, engage in spiritual leadership, and often achieve significant autonomy. As discussed in the previous chapter, abbesses commanded respect, managed vast estates, and engaged in political and spiritual affairs, often with more freedom than their secular counterparts. For women who preferred not to marry or who saw a different path for themselves, the monastic life offered a powerful alternative, allowing them to carve out a unique social and intellectual position for themselves. Even within marriage, women often held considerable agency in the daily management of their households. In peasant families, the wife was a crucial economic partner, often responsible for the dairy, poultry, gardens, and processing of foodstuffs. She worked alongside her husband in the fields and managed the domestic economy. Her labor was essential for the family's survival and prosperity. A peasant woman who skillfully managed her resources and contributed significantly to the family's income was not just doing housework, she was an economic agent, vital to the family's well-being and by extension their modest social standing within the village. Her social mobility, though limited, was dependent on her ability to contribute effectively to the household economy. In urban areas, women were often partners in their husbands' businesses. A merchant's wife might manage the shop while he was away on trading journeys, keep the accounts, or deal with customers. Upon his death, it was common for the widow to inherit and continue the business, often with great success. This inheritance was a direct form of social mobility, allowing her to maintain or even improve her economic standing and influence within the merchant community. Consider a woman named Beatrice, whose husband owned a successful dyeing business in Florence. Beatrice might have worked alongside him for years, learning the trade, managing the finances, and dealing with clients. When her husband passed, Beatrice did not simply retreat. She took over the business, managed her employees, secured new contracts, and ensured its continued profitability. Her personal success contributed not only to her own wealth, but also to the economic vibrancy of her city, earning her respect and solidifying her place as a powerful businesswoman. The idea that women had no choice in marriage is also an oversimplification. While arranged marriages were common, especially among the upper classes, consent was often a legal and religious requirement. Forcing a woman into marriage was generally condemned by the church. While outright refusal might be difficult, a woman could voice her objections, and some alliances were indeed broken off due to the bride's firm opposition. Moreover, among the lower classes, greater freedom of choice existed, and young people often chose their own partners, subject to parental approval. Love matches, though not the primary driver of marriage for all, were certainly not unheard of. The narratives of medieval courtly love, while idealized, suggest a recognition of emotional connection and personal preference. Furthermore, women could and did use their marital status as a springboard for political or social influence. A noblewoman might host salons, fostering intellectual and artistic circles, or she might act as a patron of literature and art, shaping the cultural landscape of her time. Her network of connections, often built through her marriage and her own social interactions, could be incredibly valuable for her family and for her own influence. She could use her social position to intercede on behalf of others, to petition for legal changes, or to promote her family's interests. Therefore, the portrayal of medieval marriage as an inescapable cage offering no path for a woman's agency or social advancement is largely a myth. Through the mechanisms of dowry and dower, through the crucial roles women played in household and business management, through the opportunities afforded by widowhood, and even through the subtle art of influence within their marital bonds, medieval women found numerous ways to secure their economic position, exercise authority, and experience significant forms of social mobility. They were not just passive recipients of their fate, but active participants in shaping their lives, often leveraging the institution of marriage itself to their advantage. Number 3, more than just property. The surprising ways. Medieval women owned land, ran businesses, and stood up in court. A common legend suggests that medieval women were little more than the property of their fathers or husbands, devoid of legal rights, unable to own land, engage in commerce, or represent themselves in court. This narrative paints a bleak picture of women as legally invisible, completely dependent on male guardians for their economic and social existence. Such a view implies that any form of social mobility, especially economic advancement, was fundamentally impossible for women. However, historical records reveal a vastly different reality, showing that medieval women, in various contexts and through different legal customs, actively owned property, managed businesses, and participated in legal proceedings, challenging this widespread misconception. Let us explore the concept of land ownership. While it is true that primogeniture, the system where the eldest son inherits all land, was common, it was not universal and did not apply to all types of property or in all situations. Women could and did inherit land, especially if there were no male heirs or if special provisions were made. A daughter might inherit land in the absence of sons, or she might inherit a portion of her father's movable goods and money. More importantly, widows frequently inherited significant portions of their deceased husband's estates, often their dower lands, which they held for life. This dower land was legally hers to manage, profit from, and even defend in court. Consider a woman named Isabella, whose husband died young. She might inherit a third of his lands, including a manor house, fields, and serfs. Isabella would then be the lady of that manor, collecting rents, administering justice in her local court, and making decisions about agricultural production. She was not just a placeholder, she was a landowner with real economic and social power, able to maintain her own household and provide for her children. This form of land ownership directly translated into social standing and economic independence. Beyond inheritance, women also purchased and sold property. Records from various medieval towns show women engaging in land transactions, buying houses, shops, and plots of land, often with money they had earned themselves through trade or inheritance. These transactions indicate a clear legal capacity to own and manage real estate. A woman named Marjorie, for example, might save up from her successful brewing business and invest in a small plot of land within the town walls, which she could then rent out for additional income or perhaps build another shop. Her ability to acquire and manage property on her own demonstrates a significant degree of financial autonomy and contributes to her social advancement. When it comes to running businesses, medieval women were remarkably active and legally recognized. As discussed before, women were involved in a wide array of trades, from brewing and baking to weaving, tailoring, and running inns. In many urban centers, the concept of femme sole, which roughly translates to single woman, but applied to married women who operated businesses independently, was a crucial legal provision. This allowed a married woman to conduct trade in her own name, enter into contracts, incur debts, and sue or be sued in court, all without her husband's involvement or permission. This was a significant legal right that empowered women to be independent economic actors. A woman who ran a successful business as a femme sole, like Joanna the Mercer selling textiles in London, was a respected figure in her community, contributing to the local economy and building her own wealth and reputation. Her success was her own, and it offered a direct path to social mobility within the merchant class. The legal standing of women in court is another area where the legend often fails to align with reality. While women were not always able to hold certain political offices or serve in all capacities, they were far from absent in legal proceedings. Women appeared in court as plaintiffs, defending their rights, demanding justice, or seeking redress for wrongs committed against them. They also appeared as defendants, defending themselves against accusations. They sued for a breach of contract, property disputes, and even violence. The records from manorial courts, ecclesiastical courts, and royal courts frequently show women litigating their cases. A peasant woman, Agnes, might bring a case against a neighbor for trespassing on her land or for stealing her chickens, or she might defend herself against an accusation of a broken promise. Her ability to stand before a court, present her case, and seek a legal judgment demonstrates a recognized legal personality and agency within the medieval justice system. It was not always easy, and biases certainly existed, but the door was not entirely closed. Ecclesiastical courts, which dealt with matters of marriage, wills, and morality, were particularly accessible to women. Women frequently brought cases related to marriage contracts, dowries, and dower rights. They sought annulments, divorces though limited, and legal separation. These courts provided a forum where women could assert their rights concerning their marital and economic security. A woman seeking an annulment, for example, would present her case, call witnesses, and argue for her freedom from a marriage that was deemed unlawful. This active participation in legal processes directly contradicted the idea of women being legally invisible or powerless. Even in guardianship, women held rights. A widowed mother was often the primary guardian of her children, responsible for managing their inheritance until they came of age. This role gave her significant authority over the family's assets and the children's upbringing, including their education and future marriages. This was not a passive role, it required legal and administrative competence. Lady Edith, a widow, would be responsible for her young son's future, managing his lands and income, and arranging his eventual marriage. Her decisions would directly impact the family's long-term prosperity and social standing. In specific regions or during particular periods, women's legal rights could be even more expansive. For example, in parts of Scandinavia and some Germanic legal traditions, women often had greater inheritance rights and legal autonomy than in some other parts of Europe. Local customs varied widely, and these variations provided different opportunities for women to exercise their rights and improve their social standing. Therefore, the legend of medieval women being completely without legal rights, unable to own property, or engage in commerce is a significant oversimplification. As medieval women were active economic agents, landowners, business owners, and participants in the legal system. They inherited, bought, sold, and managed property. They ran successful businesses, often independently. They stood up in court, asserting their rights and seeking justice. While limitations certainly existed and varied by region and social class, the historical evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates that medieval women possessed a surprising degree of legal and economic agency, enabling them to achieve various forms of social mobility within their often complex and challenging world. Number 2. Breaking the chains of the soil. How peasant women climbed the social ladder and forged new destinies. The enduring legend of medieval peasants often paints a picture of unchanging, static lives, eternally bound to the land, with no hope of escaping their birthright. For peasant women, this legend implies an even more rigid fate, a life of unremitting toil in the fields, marriage to a fellow peasant, and the endless cycle of childbearing, with absolutely no prospect of social mobility. This narrative suggests that the social structure was so inflexible that a peasant woman's destiny was sealed from birth, making any upward movement impossible. However, the reality, while certainly challenging, reveals that even within the confines of rural life, and especially through the dynamic forces of urbanization, peasant women found pathways, however narrow, to improve their circumstances and forge new destinies, challenging the very notion of an unbreachable social ceiling. One of the most significant avenues for social mobility for peasant women was migration from the countryside to the burgeoning towns and cities. The growth of urban centers in the High Middle Ages created new economic opportunities that did not exist in the manorial system. The towns offered different types of work, higher wages, and a measure of personal freedom that was often absent in the feudal countryside. A young peasant woman, perhaps named Alara, living in a small village, might hear tales of the opportunities in the nearby town of Bristol or Cologne. She might decide to leave her village, sometimes with her family's permission, sometimes without, to seek her fortune. Upon arriving in town, Alara might find work as a domestic servant in a wealthy household. While service might seem like a continuation of manual labor, it offered significant advantages. Domestic service often provided regular wages, food, lodging, and an introduction to a different way of life. Servants in noble or merchant households could learn new skills, from cooking and cleaning to managing household accounts or assisting with trade. These skills could then be leveraged for better positions or even to start small, independent ventures. A servant who proved herself capable might rise to become a trusted housekeeper, a skilled seamstress, or even a manager of an inn. This move from agricultural labor to urban service was a clear upward step, offering better living conditions and prospects for the future. For example, a maid who served in a wealthy merchant's house for many years, learning the intricacies of trade and household management, might eventually save enough money to open her own small shop or marry into a tradesman's family, thereby achieving a definite improvement in her social standing. Beyond domestic service, towns offered women opportunities in various trades and crafts. As previously discussed, women were active in brewing, baking, textile production, and various forms of retail. A peasant woman who moved to a town might become an apprentice to a craftswoman, learning a skilled trade like weaving or embroidery. Once she had completed her apprenticeship, she could work independently or join a workshop. This was a direct path to economic independence and professional recognition, which significantly elevated her status from that of an agricultural laborer. Imagine a young woman from a small farming village, now a skilled weaver in a bustling urban workshop, earning good wages, living in her own rented room, and perhaps even contributing to a local women's guild. Her life would be dramatically different and demonstrably better than the one she left behind. Marriage also offered a path, albeit a rarer one, for social mobility. While most peasant women married other peasants, sometimes a particularly fortunate or appealing peasant woman might marry someone from a slightly higher social stratum, such as a prosperous artisan, a successful merchant's apprentice, or even a lower-ranking townsman. While this was not a common occurrence, it was not impossible. Such a marriage would immediately elevate her social standing, allowing her to escape the confines of rural life and enter a more prosperous urban environment. Her children, born into an urban artisan or merchant family, would have even greater opportunities than she did, illustrating multi-generational social advancement. Even within rural communities, opportunities for modest advancement existed. Not all peasants were equally impoverished or bound. Some peasant families, through shrewd management, hard work, or favorable circumstances, could accumulate more land, more livestock, or more wealth than their neighbors. The women in these more prosperous peasant households played a crucial role. They managed the dairy, oversaw the poultry, tended the garden, processed food, and often engaged in small-scale local trades, such as selling surplus eggs, cheese, or ale. A woman known for her excellent ale or her successful dairy products could earn a reputation and additional income for her family, contributing directly to their improved economic standing within the village. This was not a radical leap, but a steady, incremental form of social mobility that could distinguish one peasant family from another. The church also provided a pathway for social mobility for some peasant women. While entering a nunnery was generally more accessible to noble women, some convents did accept women from lower social strata, sometimes with a dowry paid by a wealthy patron or through a gift of labor. For a peasant woman, joining a convent offered an escape from physical labor, access to education, and a life of spiritual pursuit and community. While it was not a path to, wealth or political power in the secular sense, it offered a different kind of upward mobility, social prestige, intellectual development, and a respected position within the religious hierarchy. A peasant woman who became a nun would be viewed with more respect and dignity than her peers who remained in the village. Moreover, the Black Death in the mid-14th century, while catastrophic, inadvertently created unprecedented opportunities for social mobility for the survivors, including peasant women. The drastic reduction in population meant a severe labor shortage. Landlords were desperate for tenants and laborers, and wages for those who survived soared. This shift in the labor market gave peasant women, like their male counterparts, more bargaining power. They could demand better wages, more favorable tenancy agreements, and sometimes even move to different manors or towns seeking better conditions. The old feudal bonds weakened, and personal freedom became more attainable. A peasant woman who survived the plague might find herself in a position to negotiate for more land, better pay, or even to leave her manor entirely for a more lucrative opportunity, something almost unthinkable before the pandemic. This dramatic demographic shift fundamentally altered the social landscape and provided a unique, albeit tragic, window for significant upward mobility. Therefore, the legend of the unmoving, unchanging peasant woman, forever chained to the soil, is an oversimplification. While life for medieval peasant women was undoubtedly hard, opportunities for social mobility, both incremental and significant, did exist. Through migration to towns, entry into domestic service or urban trades, strategic marriages, the cultivation of prosperous rural households, and the profound impact of demographic shifts like the Black Death, peasant women found ways to break free from the strictures of their birth and forge new, more prosperous, and often more autonomous lives for themselves and their descendants. Their journey was not always easy, but it was far from static or entirely without hope. Number 1, the pen was mightier than the spinning wheel, how medieval women read, wrote, taught, and shaped intellectual life. The final persistent legend about medieval women often portrays them as largely uneducated, confined to domestic tasks, with no access to books, schooling, or intellectual pursuits. This narrative suggests that literacy and learning were almost exclusively male domains, reserved for monks, clergy, and noblemen, thus limiting women's social mobility to practical skills and domestic roles, preventing them from participating in the vibrant intellectual and cultural life of the Middle Ages. However, a deeper examination of historical evidence reveals a surprising number of medieval women who were not only literate but also highly educated, engaging in scholarly pursuits, writing significant works, teaching others, and actively shaping the intellectual landscape of their time. The pen, for many women, was indeed a tool for both personal enlightenment and social advancement. Convents were pivotal centers of learning for women. For many medieval noblewomen, and some from lesser backgrounds, entering a convent offered an unparalleled opportunity for education. Within the convent walls, women learned to read and write, often in Latin, the language of scholarship and liturgy. They studied scripture, theology, philosophy, and classical texts. They maintained extensive libraries, copied manuscripts, and produced illuminated books. Abbesses, like the extraordinary Hildegard of Bingen, were not only spiritual leaders but also celebrated scholars, composers, physicians, and mystics whose writings and intellectual contributions influenced emperors, popes, and scholars across Europe. Her work on natural history and medicine, her theological treatises, and her unique musical compositions demonstrate a profound level of intellect and learning. Another example is Heloise, the 12th century abbess and scholar, who corresponded with Peter Abelard on complex theological and philosophical matters, demonstrating an intellectual prowess that was widely recognized in her time. These women were not just literate, they were intellectuals who actively contributed to the body of medieval knowledge. Beyond the cloister, noble women in secular society also received significant education. While their education might have differed from that of men, it often included literacy, numeracy, and knowledge of foreign languages. They learned to manage large estates, which required reading and writing for accounting, correspondence, and legal documents. They often served as patrons of literature and art, commissioning manuscripts, employing scribes, and supporting poets and chroniclers. Many noblewomen owned personal libraries filled with devotional texts, romances, histories, and even classical literature. Eleanor of Aquitaine, for example, was known for her patronage of troubadours and her sophisticated courtly culture. Her granddaughter Blanche of Castile, regent of France, was renowned for her political acumen and intelligence, skills honed through a rigorous education. These women were not merely symbols of patronage. They were educated individuals who engaged with the intellectual trends of their day. Perhaps the most famous example of a medieval woman who truly wielded the pen for social mobility and intellectual impact is Christine de Pizan. Born in Italy in the late 14th century, Christine moved to the French court with her scholar father. After being widowed young, she chose to support her family through her writing, an astonishing and almost unheard of career for a woman at the time. She became a professional writer, producing numerous works of poetry, prose, and social commentary. Her most famous work, the Book of the City of Ladies, published around 1405, is a powerful defense of women, challenging misogynistic stereotypes and celebrating the achievements of women throughout history. Christine's decision to become a professional author was a radical act of economic and intellectual independence. She used her literacy and intellectual gifts to carve out a unique social position for herself, moving from a position of potential hardship to one of international renown and influence. Her life is a powerful testament to how literacy and intellectual pursuits could be a profound engine of social mobility for women. Even among the lower classes, literacy was not entirely absent, particularly in urban environments. As towns grew and commerce flourished, the practical need for basic literacy and numeracy increased. Women involved in trade, such as merchants, shopkeepers, or alewives, often needed to be able to keep accounts, write receipts, and manage inventories. While not all women achieved full literacy, the ability to read and write, even minimally, was a valuable skill that could enhance their economic opportunities and social standing. For a female shopkeeper, the ability to record sales and manage debts was essential for her business success and her family's livelihood. This practical literacy directly contributed to their economic and professional mobility. The role of women as educators within the home also contributed to the spread of literacy, as mothers often taught their children, both boys and girls, basic literacy and religious instruction. While formal schooling might have been limited, the home was an important site of learning, and women played a critical role in passing on knowledge and skills. For example, a noblewoman might instruct her daughters in reading, writing, and household management, preparing them for their future roles. A skilled peasant mother might teach her daughters how to calculate market prices or manage resources. Furthermore, medieval women served as scribes, illuminators, and even university lecturers, though the latter was exceptionally rare. Records show women working in scriptoria, copying and illustrating manuscripts, particularly in convents but also in secular workshops. These were skilled professions that required a high degree of literacy and artistic talent. For women who pursued these crafts, it was a path to a respected profession and independent income. While women were generally excluded from formal universities, a few exceptional women, like the Italian physician Trotula of Salerno, were associated with medical schools and contributed to medical texts, demonstrating their expertise and intellectual contributions in highly specialized fields. The historical evidence clearly contradicts the legend of the universally uneducated medieval woman. From the profound intellectual contributions of abbesses like Hildegard of Bingen to the groundbreaking career of Christine de Pizan, and from the practical literacy of urban businesswomen to the educational role of mothers in the home, medieval women were actively engaged with books, writing, and learning. Their intellectual pursuits were not merely decorative. They were often instrumental in their economic independence, social advancement, and their ability to shape the cultural and intellectual landscape of their time. The pen, for many medieval women, was indeed a mighty instrument for defying expectations and forging new destinies.